started on Facebook. So I started to realize that once we are together and we get to ask each other questions, we are actually live. We did not put this together. It was spontaneous. I said I wanted to have some kind of consistency. And yes, sir. Okay, he's trying to, that way?
They're just trying to get you on camera.
Oh, I wanted to have some consistency and actually doing podcasts every day. I just didn't want to do it one time and not do it this several times. So we have been talking the last couple of days, voices of men. And the reason why I'm so passionate of voices of men is because a lot of times, and I told you the last two episodes, is that women, we constantly talk. We're always talking. We are talkers. We express ourselves. And interesting enough, I'm on our podcast and Facebook. So Facebook, you actually see my guest today. You actually see him with me tonight. Podcast, you do not. So I'm going to introduce him. I have my husband with me tonight. Dennis P. McNulty. He is a pastor. He's a teacher. He's my covering. So we're going to spend some time talking with him tonight. The last couple of episodes, we have been talking about voices of men. And my husband, those of you who know him, because he speaks a lot when you see him teaching and he's doing things, you don't necessarily hear him talking. And sometimes I used to joke him. I was like, babe, you don't have no friends. You need friends. And and we'll laugh about that. So we talk about several things because I want to hear his voice. A lot of times raising a boy, and we started talking about that the other night, raising a young African-American boy in today's society has its challenges. And one of the things that we started to hear their story, we want to hear their hearts, we want to hear what is happening, their thought process. And we understand just raising boys in today's society. And I think this would be a great time for my husband to come in and be a part of this because he is a male that is actually raising a boy who is African American. So he understands the dual relationship and the biracial and things like that. So the last couple of episodes we were talking about the voice of black men. And I thought this would be a great piece to bring him in at this point, listening to some of the things that me and Mr. Miller had spent some time talking about and the things that we were doing, that he could actually share his point of view and the things that he thinks when it comes to raising a son in these times. So we talk about raising men and raising boys. And I'll say this before he gets started. One of the things I like is that we are challenged. We are actually challenged. And I don't know about you, those who have sons. When I saw my Jonathan face, my whole life changed. And raising sons in today's society, especially African-American boys, has its challenges. And hats off to parents and married parents, single parents, parents who are raising boys, because the statistics, and you look at the statistics and everything that's happening, we start to realize Uncle Dennis is Uncle Dennis is like, yes, I got a joke with you about that, Malika. So those are some of the things that we want to spend time with. And we thank you for all those that join us on the podcast. It has been such a blessing. All those that replay, send emails and reach out and send hearts. So this is new to us. So we're doing podcasts as well as Facebook. And thank you guys for joining us. Honey?
Well, listen, it's absolutely a blessing to be part of my wife's podcast. I am an impromptu guest. I was not originally part of the iPod team. The podcast team. Mm-hmm. And we do appreciate my wife. You know, she's just so gifted in so many areas. And the thing about it is, I think Hakeem is finding this out. You better be real careful if you agree to do something with her, because she's going to hold your feet to the fire.
Yes.
And so he wasn't able to make it. And so she said to me, would you like to do this podcast? And I had some experience with radio. I had some experience doing podcasts. I mean, going all the way back to a little something called Blog Talk Radio. And I hope that these folks are going to kick me off this podcast for mentoring Blog Talk Radio. But I used to do it as part of my Bible study teaching, just to reach a wider audience, and I mean back in the day. But the fact of the matter is, I feel privileged. And, when my wife shared with me kind of what the topic might be, or we would just kind of banter back and forth, the first thing that came to my mind is in the book of beginnings. We're in the 3rd chapter of the book of beginnings, Genesis. And the Word of God tells us that Adam says to the Lord, when the Lord came looking for him in the garden, he said, I heard thy voice and I was afraid, so I hid myself. Now, I would like to begin right there, our conversation tonight, because the question becomes, who is hearing your voice and what is the reaction upon hearing it, right? So, of course, we know in the story of Adam that he was afraid because of his infraction. And we see in the rebuke of the Lord, he said, because you've hearkened unto the voice of thy wife. And so we get this whole idea about the power of one's voice. What are you doing with it? And we hear that in our culture now, not necessarily from a theological perspective, but we hear that in our culture relative to what are you doing with your voice? I feel voiceless. I don't feel like I have a voice. And the fact of the matter is we all have to be mindful of the voice that God gave us. Are we using it as good stewards? And then, frankly, we have to be aware of the fact that some people have liberty with their voice that some folks don't have, right? So you have to be careful with it. But what are you doing with your voice? And so as it comes into the area of raising up children, raising up a son, we would hope that the son or anybody that we have influence with, for those of us that are coaches, we would hope that the young men that we coach, for those that are in business like my wife, those that she is mentoring, those that are, under your tutelage, under your authority, we would pray that the voice is not something that they're afraid of, but rather something that they understand is necessary to grow and mature them. So those are just a couple of my thoughts tonight with regard to voice. And, I want to say to the folks that are listening only audio as far as the podcast goes, I promise you I look exactly like I sound.
Now those who
now those that are on video,
social media is probably looking like
that's not going to work.
That's not going to work. But so those that replay the podcast, no, okay. So let me say this: we had talked about it about a couple of podcasts, and once again, you have to, when you get an opportunity, listen to the last two podcasts. One of the things that I spoke about during it was being married to an Italian-Irish gentleman and how we met and things like that. So we talk about marriage and we talk. So when you hear us say, oh, Malik is going to get you, say, okay, Malik is, oh, my husband, Uncle Dennis is black. He's actually Italian and Irish mixed. But one of the things that I enjoy is that when people ask me questions about who I am, I'm African American, and how I can be detailed in who I am, and I still firm in who I am, whether or not I'm a McNulty by marriage, I am still African American. One of the things that I started to realize is that I would watch. Now, some of us, when we were talking about it before, our father relationships, our daddy relationships, of course, I shared with you that my dad died at 52 in the earlier episode, and the things that I will watch my husband do with my children, I always longed for that. I lost my dad at a young age, and he also had 9 of us by a certain age. And so the challenges of being a dad and what we expect of dads, I knew that Slugger would protect me, that this is what he would do, in spite of, I know that he was my protection. If I call Slugger, Slugger gonna come out. So when you're developing the voices of men, and believe it or not, I'm so happy that my husband is on here, because you hear him preach a lot and you'll hear him teach a lot. But he's really not a talker. He's really not someone that has a conversation. And so I'm so glad that he's on here, because I want to pick his brain about being a man. What were your feelings when you saw Jonathan? What was it that made you say, hey, I have to change, or I have to position myself differently with raising a boy versus raising Hannah and Leah, from your aspect?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jonathan was first. So, I had it from the perspective of now I have the responsibility of rearing this young man. And of course, the reality of it is, regardless of what your father was, who your father was, now I happen to have a dad that was a terrific guy. He had his own struggles, as we all do, but he was a family man. He was family oriented. He loved my mother. So I was fortunate in that regard. But the fact of the matter is, what we have to understand relative to the conversation, relative to the idea about voice, is that most of us learn from places outside of the home. Now, that's something that we should prayerfully look to change. that indeed, if we go back to the scripture with Adam saying, I heard thy voice, it really ties into what you're talking about as it relates to your dad. You knew that your dad was your protector. Well, it's interesting because Adam lost sight of that. Adam realized his folly, he realized his sin, he realized his iniquity, and that caused him to hide from God that really was intent on protecting him. So the first thing that came to mind, and we, most folks are aware, Jonathan was born premature. So I could remember going right into fight mode, right? So I went right into spiritual warfare because of the condition that he found himself in. So I didn't have a lot of time to process what would maybe be my normal feelings. The other story I like to tell is after getting him, by the grace of God, out of harm's way from a medical perspective. My wife is going to chuckle at this because we got a rule in this house, and the rule is we don't purchase anything that says assembly required. And the reason that there's no assembly or anything, we don't purchase anything that is assembly is required, is because I can't assemble anything. I just, my brother Joe could build you a house from the ground up. He could probably even draw the blueprints up for you. Me, no. I don't know a flat head from a Phillips head from a screwdriver, forget it. But I do remember that I was filled with anxiety about Jonathan's nursery. And you might remember this. And Crystalline was kind enough to come from North Carolina with, bedroom furnishings for what, a new baby would need. A crib and changing table and all of the rest. And I can remember waking up in the middle of the night. You were sleeping. And I just said to the Lord, I said, Lord, I just have to do this. This is important to me that I could build this bed or this crib for this child. And I promise you, I have never built anything before or after. And indeed, it was, man, there was a lot of parts. There was, we had a little sticker on there, A, B, C, this, and, the long list of what you need to do. And by the grace of God, I was able to complete it. Now, I have to tell you, I was frightened as to whether or not it would hold together. And I never will forget that after it was done, and it came out relatively well, I remember being so unsure of myself that I put a dumbbell, a weight, in the crib to see if it would be sustained through the night. And when I woke up in the morning after getting a couple hours rest, I was grateful that, it held, that it stuck. And that was important to me. Now, obviously, Jonathan was too young to understand the significance of that, but that was monumental to me. It let me know that even though this is a new season, God is in fact going to give me the ability to be effective in this new season in ways that I could not even imagine that I would be. So when you talk about the voice, when you talk about rearing, when you talk about what my feeling was anxiety. I was overwhelmed, but that dissipated, albeit slowly, because I was able to realize that God is equipping me for a new season. And so that's kind of what my thought process was with regard to that.
And so now Jonathan is 16.
Yeah, fast forward, right?
So we're fast forwarding to a teenagers. What do you think? What advice? What do you see the change in your son? And the reason why I'm asking these questions because a lot of us have sons, and a lot of us have, and we're parenting. Some of us are co-parenting. Some of us are parenting on our own. Hats off to you. I promise you, when I see single parents come into the daycare center and allowing us to be a part of rearing their boys, and even education and things like that, and how we pray for them. We pray for them together because one of the things we want opportunities for them that sometimes are missed in our area or missed in our culture, and they don't really get the now, especially with education, they socially promote you until you actually either drop out of school or you finish school. And those are some of the challenges. That what can we make different now? True that my children have gotten a slight different opportunity, right? Only because one of the things that was happening is I wanted to be involved with their sharing and raising or teaching young men and women in at-risk environments. And so because before I got married and had children, I did a lot of, and he did too, like prison ministries and different things like that. And so my heart came to the point where how can we be effective as McNulty's, as the ministries in the area? How can we reach out to our local at-risk children or children that don't have what our children have. How can we be a light? And the Bible tells us to be a light in our area. How can we illuminate? How can we have hands-on? How can we not just talk in the four walls of the church? How can we get out and be a part of making sure that they are getting it, and not just our children? And once again, I am so thankful to my husband and my children that allowed me to share my time and my life with thousands and thousands of children over the years, so that we can effectively be a part of how do we get them to turn out and do something different? How can we change the statistics? How can we be a part of being someone positive in their lives, taking them from one step to the next step? How can we, I guess that's where I'm at. How, honey, can we be effective? There's so many things that we did and we used to do, and not to pat ourselves on the back, it's that we were commissioned by God to do. So
Yeah, well,
let's talk from that point.
Piggybacking off of that and what Malika's commenting here on Facebook, consistency is a big element, or a big key, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no question that that is indeed the case. Scripture tells us to train a child. Now, obviously, you know, they're coming into their teenage years and they're growing, and they're not a child per se. But the fact of the matter is, we don't raise them as much as we train them. And when it comes to training, consistency is the key. Whether you're doing, physical training, or whether you're doing, studying for SAT prep or anything like that, consistency is indeed the key. So I think that it is important for us, and it is incumbent upon us, to demonstrate godliness consistently. Now, listen, they know their father. They know that I'm Irish and I have a temper. They know that I will go off in a flat second. But the fact of the matter is, they realize that that's just one part of who I am as a person. And so we have to see consistency modeled, consistently. And so the fact of the matter is, we have to be able to demonstrate to them. And then I think the other factor is that at some point they grow to see that it's worthwhile to do this, that we're not just doing it to do it, that we're not doing it without results, but that we're doing it, and our success, however you deem, or whatever you deem success to be, is in fact connected to our consistency. It is connected to how we do, why we do. And that brings me back to my previous point, which is we have to be real careful, because in too many situations, many of our young people are learning these things from people that learned it from people that learned it from people. And a lot of times they're just people that are passing on bad information.
Yes.
What I call 511.
Yes.
So they got bad information, they're passing on bad information. And if we're not careful, generationally, this will continue until somebody stands up and says, wait a minute, this is not who you are. This is not what you've been called to be. This is not the voice that I want you to yield to. I want you to hear my voice. And so what happens is, over time, you begin to become a greater influence. Your voice becomes magnified as a result of the consistency, as a result of them realizing that they can trust you. And so, we have to get back to training them in godliness.
So let me ask you this, because you said, and there's two things. I see Miss Malika saying one of her comments was boys need stability, truth, right? And then I heard you say that there are things that they were taught, bad information upon bad information upon bad information. Is that correct? One of the things I started to realize, that the more I encounter with young men now and older who don't have dads, or the information that they received, they don't realize that it's bad information until they get caught in the system, or they get caught in places that is not conducive to transition them out, until they have somebody that become a part of their life to get there. So once you deal with an area like, hey, listen, to them, this information that they're getting is truth.
Of
to
course.
them, this information is not bad information.
It's a great
so they
point.
realize the information doesn't work. So in the beginning, they really believe, and I try to sit back sometimes and ask questions, only because I came from a little different background. So when I start seeing people in certain situations, in certain conditions, I have to hear their heart to see how they arrived there, and what can we do to help them transition to the next place if they want to. Because really, you have to have a desire to say, okay, I put down what I thought was right to do, and it didn't work for me. So if you believe that there's a system, or if you believe that there's a plan that will work for me, then how can you help me? And that's what a lot of people look for, especially when you're looking at younger children that are in the 6th, 7th, 8th grade. They really think they're already in high school. And a lot of them are in bad situations, and a lot of them are stuck even now, not understanding, and especially with school not being open. That's a big factor. They don't have somewhere they can release, that they can spend time, and they're in these broken homes, and we don't actually have a hands and face-to-face that we normally have if they were in school. So I started to realize some of these young boys, and they get quiet, unlike girls. We're expressive, you know.
You are?
You know that.
What?
So we are so let's see. So when I realized that, you know, I really want them to hear. We want to hear their voices. We want to hear what they're thinking. We want to hear, because if you don't hear what they're thinking, even though they hear you, they still going back to do what they're familiar with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like the part that where you talk about, you know, to them that it's truth. You know, they believe it. If they didn't think that it was believable, they wouldn't be deceived by it.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the part. In order for deception to be what it is, there has to be some element of attractiveness to it. I tell folks all the time, the enemy knows what buttons to push, and he's not going to ring your doorbell and put something on your doorstep that is not something that's going to entice you.
Yes.
So we have to understand that the young people need to understand. And you know, the thing that kind of churning within me is that with this whole idea of there being a voice, we want them to understand that if they trust this process, if they allow themselves to be disciplined, if they allow themselves to be discipled, then they're going to have a voice. And by voice, I mean platform. Sometimes I think that the children or the young men feel disenfranchised because they don't feel as though anybody's listening. And that's a frustrating place to be in, regardless of age. You could be 7th, 8th, 9th, or even beyond. But if you don't feel you have a voice, then the challenge then becomes, what do I do with what I'm feeling? What do I do with the lust? What do I do with the anger? What do I do with the fears? What do I do with the anxieties? You and you know, there's this thing, and in the Latino community called machismo, right? So macho man. And so we have this tendency to, again, give them erroneous information with regard to what they are expected to be. And so we expect them to be macho. We expect them to be tough. We expect them to be a man. But the problem is we expect it, but we're not doing anything to help them become that which we are expecting them to be. And so go ahead.
So that brings Malika point. And so that's why I got my other iPad so I can read y'all comments, because you know I'm learning how to see with my my bifocals right here, my progressives. You don't call them bifocals anymore. One of the things that Malika says that boy need role, and true, they need role models to actually live what we're trying to get them to live out. What do you think about that?
No, I don't think there's any question about it, that they're not going to have a great likelihood of duplicating that which they've not seen. So they want to be able to, we want to be able to demonstrate it to them so that they could go away with the understanding that this could be realized for them as well. I often tease my spiritual son, Josue. You know, he kind of fancies himself as saying he wants what I have, but the problem is he's not always willing to do what's required to obtain it. But the fact of the matter is, if you let them know that this is obtainable, that position of feeling voiceless is actually something that will in fact go away, because we're going to bring you into a place where you understand that you have a voice. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm no sociologist, but I would love some input if you're out there and that's your field of work, I think that some of our new cultural norms are presenting challenges to the very thing that we're talking about anyway. We're talking about the voice, we're talking about rearing men, we're talking about helping them to understand that they have worth, help them to understand that somebody can display to them what it should look like to be a man of God, what it looks like to be the head of your household, what it looks like to have good credit, what it looks like to have your goals met, and the like. And what happens is we're living now in a culture and a society where young people don't even have the ability to communicate effectively because they don't have to. Yet the other day I challenged my son to reach out to a teacher, and kind of just respectfully let it be known that you want to get something addressed and such. And he didn't mean nothing by it, but the email was comprised as though it was a text message. No grammatical notations, no nothing, even though it was an email. And so I very respectfully said to him, look, next time you do that, understand that sending an email is a reflection of yourself, and it should not be treated as a text message. Well, you at our age, we would say, well, of course, but you tell that to a 16 or 15-year-old, and that's somewhat of a revelation. Why? Because they don't live in that world. They're not asked to do it. So it's those little things that we can do to help them to understand. And let's just go ahead.
So one of the things, so I hear you saying, now that you're saying emails and different things like that, one of the comments I see is that social media, our children are being driven by social media, because that is the best example that, and truth, because I talked to my Leah, she declares she gonna be a TikTok a TikTok woman that makes money. So social media is a big part of what is driven by our children. And so what do you think about social media? Because once again, I think social media has its pros and cons. It has its pros, meaning that I just think that the way you use it, is our children mature enough to, and as a parent, mature enough to be able to decipher, to be able to know the difference between what they're taking in as a reality versus something that is far-fetched. How about that?
Yeah, well, it's really an individual position that everybody has to take, right? Certainly everybody doesn't mature at the same rate. I mean, I think my initial response is that for the most part, it's a dangerous terrain for them to navigate at such a young age. There's just a lot out there that's not edifying. There's a lot out there that is not conducive to growing someone. But again, it goes back to what voice they're used to listening to. It goes back to what have we poured into them. It goes back to, do they have the understanding that they can talk to you about whatever may arise.
He taught me about the mute button. He had to cough.
But see, the professionals don't tell the audience.
Well, if we pause.
No, I'm talking about the podcast. Folks wouldn't have known.
Oh, sorry, podcast.
No,
sorry.
It's this
for
warm,
those that replay.
it's this warm air. My wife is anemic and I'm not. So I promise you, it's like I live in the tropics all year long, and I just came in from outside, so I didn't want to, But anyway, we're kind of drifting. So, but the point is, we have to, as parents, we have to, as guardians, we have to, as mentors, we have to make that call on an individual basis. And you may have a situation where one child is a little bit more mature than the other. And I think, like anything, there should be parental control. I mean, there should be no teenager that should have a mother or father locked out of their phone or their network or whatever. I'll follow you, you follow me. We know they got burner accounts and they got all different kinds of things that they do. So I'm not naive with regard to some of the things that are going on. But I think we control that. I don't, because what happens is we can become overwhelmed to where we think we cannot influence them in a positive light. And if we're not careful, we'll just throw them to the wolves, into this cesspool that is social media, not realizing that if you learn to govern yourself, if you know which voices to adhere to and which ones to dismiss, this could be a powerful platform. We're using social media right now in what I hope to be considered a positive manner.
No, we love it. We love it. I was trying to invite you in, Malika, I was trying to invite you into the talk so the people on podcasts can actually hear you, because they actually replay. Let me say this, don't be sorry about the topic. I love the topic because, once again, you're sitting and listening to live or do podcasts, parents that are married who are rearing their children together. You are raising boys. You are raising men, and thank God for you. I know your story. Others need to hear your story. And I'm proud of you, by the way. If you are listening and if you're looking, this is my niece Malika, and several reasons why I'm proud of her, and I'm glad that she got on this topic or this subject with us. And the reason why I like voices of men, and I just like voices, period, I think we should be at a time where we're able to freely talk about issues that is not only covered by us, but you won't believe how many parents are out there. And I sit across from parents at the daycare center often, and I look and I pray simply because there's a lot of things they're going through that I have not went through, or there's some things I went through that I don't voice. So there are certain things that I start to realize I'm watching my fears, I'm watching my changes. You know, now that we have teenage people, I remember saying to my husband, I really need you to talk to Jonathan. Do you talk to Jonathan? And just because I don't see it, I stay on him a lot. He said, if I talk to him, you don't know. But the reality is, it is true. You're dealing with boys. We're not dealing. Congratulations. That Malika is a mother of 3, and she is literally finished college and doing some great things. And that 2022, the Jesus tag, we still living. We can't wait to see the next thing that she's doing. And she worked so hard to have boys that are in her house, and that she didn't lose to the streets, and that she has not and fight from losing them to the streets. So it's not something that she sees every day. And not only does she deal with her 3 boys, but she actually, and she is my niece, and I'm not saying because she's my niece we do that. We have a heart, you know, for others, and my family is big. We're kind of a little chaotic. There's some things that we go through, but the reality is we have a lot of boys, and some are doing good, some are doing bad, some are indifferent. And one of the things that we start to realize is that we're trying to currently catch the generation that is trying to go wayward. And really, I have this one young lady at the daycare center, and she has 4 boys. We thought the last baby she was going to have was going to be a girl. And they started coming back to the daycare center. My heart went out to her because she's literally, and I never forget, she looked at me and she said across from my desk, and she said, Miss Audrey, you would never understand. She said, and the truth is I wouldn't. Unless the Lord give me what to say to her. And I know it's God having her come back, just for her to even come back, because I can't understand raising boys on my own. Like I said, I'm married, but voices, and that's why it's so important that we get positive voices to these young African American men, just men, period, so that they can know. Because one of the things I start to realize is that men are more beaten up or torn down and not really given second chances, even by us women. Either we're going to go in full force and be a part of being the solution, or we're going to constantly remind them of where they went. So, and if that's the piece you're going to do, you just got to walk away. So when this young woman said at my desk, and with tears in her eyes, right? And this time she was pregnant with the last baby. She was like, listen, I'm having another boy. I can't possibly keep raising these boys by myself. That to me took my heart to a whole nother level, because once again, my mom had 1 boy. I have other brothers and sisters, but my dad left at 52. And then the years of him being there during that time at 52, I don't know how successful he was with his boy. I don't know. So that's why I always ask a man's point of view, what is it that will cause you to remain somewhere, or how do we shift them to change? How do we give them, one, another opportunity if they fell away? And then number 2, if there's not examples out there for them to do it. Now, yes, you know, I'll be the first one to say my children, but the truth is we got other boys that are placed in this society with us, in the business with us, who we see every day, who we're trying to teach. And society is not making it easy for them, because they're socially promoting them. Back in the day, now we're going to tell our age, 52, they used to keep us back. They're not going to allow us to pass unless we pass those classes. Well, now we're in a society there, they socially promote you until you do 2 things. Now, before, if you weren't in school, they were going to send the police or the truman officer or somebody to your house. Now what they do is they just let you drop out until you don't go back anymore. So then what happens to those children that we're actually losing to society?
Yeah, a couple of things jumped out at me when you were talking, and Malika's comments triggered a couple things as well. So first of all, yeah, there's no question that a society that is more philanthropic to the plight of a struggling woman is indeed the society that we live in. You know, there's just no question that our societal norms lend themselves to lending a hand to a struggling woman more so than a struggling man. That's just a fact of it. The man they'll label quicker. They'll say he's a bum, he ain't no good, he ain't never been no good. So there has to be room for grace. That's the first thing we have to understand, is that there has to be room for grace. Indeed, when we go back to the story of Adam, who heard the voice of God and hid, not realizing that God wasn't coming to do anything but protect him. God wasn't coming to do anything but cover him. But the point is that we have to be mindful of that, and there has to be room for grace. The other thing that jumped out at me was Nehemiah chapter 4. You said something about fighting. And Nehemiah and his contemporary Ezra were responsible for the rebuilding of Jerusalem as the post-exilic people came back from Babylonian captivity. Now, this is a hard reality, but we have many of our youth that are in the throes of captivity. They are in captivity to porn. They are in captivity to the gangs. They're in captivity to the younger girls. They're in captivity to some of the lures of social media. And we have to determine among ourselves, as they did in the time of Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah armed them. Nehemiah placed them on the wall, and he told them in no uncertain terms, fight for your sons, fight for your daughters, fight for your houses, and fight for your land.
Yeah.
So we have to get to the place where we understand that these young people are worth fighting for.
Yes.
That's the thing. We're not going to allow them into a system that disregards them. We're not going to throw out the baby with the bath water, but we are in fact going to fight. And as we fight, there may be a setback. As we fight, they may do something that's not becoming. As we fight, they may make a wrong turn. But again, there has to be room for grace. There has to be room for us to allow them to understand that although you committed a mistake, there's still going to be a plan that God wants to unfold in front of you. I often talk to young men about the prodigal son, and we've been preaching the prodigal son for, generations and generations and generations, but I'm afraid that there's a couple parts of it that we got wrong. The first part that we got wrong is that we assume that what the young man asked for, he wasn't entitled to. Well, in fact, he was entitled to his inheritance. What he got mixed up in and what caused later trouble in his life was that he was asking for it prematurely. And sometimes with our young men, they find themselves longing for something prematurely. It's not time for them to have it. They're not mature enough to handle it. And so what they do is they are set up by somebody that gives them something that they're not mature enough to handle. The other thing is, of course, we know that he went out and spent his money and his inheritance on, wine, women, and roses and riotous living. But he had that moment of clarity. Now, here's where the grace comes in again. As it relates to grace, we've got to be mindful of the fact that when these young people have that moment of clarity, when they say to themselves, I will return to my father, I will return to my mother, I will return to those that love me, we've got to be willing to make sure that we receive them, not based upon their current condition, but based upon what we previously desired them to be.
Now, that's good, because Malika says here, if we go back, it says, we have to create a true no judgment zone.
Yeah, well, exactly right.
So
again,
when
room
he
for grace.
returned home, he didn't remind them of what he took and never came back.
There you go.
So he told them of what he had, and then he gave them the best of something that else was there.
Yes.
One of the things that she also said is, if there, how can we teach someone something we were never taught, that was never taught or seen?
Well, the first thing you have to do is learn it yourself. So just because you didn't learn it in the season or in the place that you should have learned it, does not give you a license to continue to be ignorant regarding it.
Yeah.
So sometimes, back to my previous point about 511, we did not learn what we were supposed to learn, where we were supposed to learn it. Some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, we did not see modeled. We did not see it in the realm of consistency. But at some point, and this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, when I seen Jonathan, when I became a dad at 35 years old, mind you, not only did God begin to prepare me for that season, God prepared me for that role, but it put an added responsibility upon me to be something that he could eventually model. And so we may not have learned it, Malika, to Malika's point, and to the rest of our friends that have been kind enough to join us. We may not have learned it where we were supposed to learn it, when we were supposed to learn it, but at some point we have to understand that it is incumbent upon us to learn it so that we can in fact pass it on to them.
Yeah.
Because if we don't break the cycle, who will? If we don't say, you know what, Malika's a perfect example, and she just completed her bachelor's degree. Well, on her social media, she said it as only she would. She said, I did it for them. So now, whether they go on, and I know Malika being their mother, they will, but they can't say, well, how are you going to tell me to go to college? You didn't go to college. Now, that's not saying if you're here and you don't have a college degree that you can't implore your children to achieve higher than you did. But the fact of the matter is, you could have said, well, I've never seen. And how many times do we see and celebrate the person that says, I'm the first person in my college to get a degree. I'm the first person to be a business owner. I'm the first time home owner. So in other words, just because you didn't learn it where and when, you took the initiative to learn it. So now somebody has information. And that's the key. Now somebody has information.
And the beautiful thing in it is what I like what you just said is, it doesn't give us an excuse to continue to be ignorant.
Exactly.
I like that. Just because you didn't learn it doesn't mean you can't go out to be taught it because you've seen it somewhere. Whether it's on social media, whether you're hearing us talk or you hear somebody else talk, there's somewhere along the line where you've seen it. Whether you had a job and somebody else had it, they're talking about it, you see. And how many of us can really honestly say there's certain things that we long for, right? And so we'll watch somebody's life not because we're jealous, but we admire what they have done. So we make ourselves teachable enough so that we can actually adhere to what they're saying at the same time.
Doris Highland's birthday, 12/17/20. All right, we're shouting out Mother Doris.
We're going to shout her out. We didn't forget her. We'll shout her out. Mother Doris. Mother Doris. Mother Doris not on social media, but happy birthday to her. We are only on the, what's today's date?
Today's the 7th.
Today is the 7th. So we are going to shout out. There's several birthdays in between now and then. I promise you we'll shout out to Mother Doris Highland. We will not forget her. Thank you for reminding us. Thanks so much. I
will call and sing
and he always, every year, call and sing happy birthday to her. So I don't think he ever missed a birthday with Mother Doris. But thank you so much. Appreciate you. So one of the things that we started to realize is that when we're dealing with, and the reason why this topic
is it 12/7 or 12/17 for Mother Doris? Is
it 12/7? Is it today, or is it the 17th?
Oh, it's today. Well, then we really need to
It's not the 17th. What's today? What is her date?
I always thought her birthday was after mine.
I did too. I thought because I know his is the 19th. His is the 9th, which is this week.
Yeah, I thought hers
and
was around
Mother
Deacon
Doris
Carl's.
Is her. Oh, happy birthday! Okay, we'll call her. We'll make sure. Thank you.
Y'all done saved. You done saved Christmas.
Oh, Levine said 12/17. So y'all confused. So what we'll do is we'll sing to her today. We'll call her after our broadcast.
Now listen,
we'll sing to her today and the 17th.
Before this is over, somebody got to tell me definitively if today is her birthday or the 17th, because I had a situation the other day where I picked up the phone to my brother-in-law Ralph because I seen a social media post by his niece, my niece, Christian, and she was saying happy birthday. And I done messed around and had to call him and say happy birthday, and I had the wrong
All
day.
he had to do is ask his wife.
Well, I could have, but she was in getting an X-ray.
I knew.
All right. So here's the thing: life comes at you fast. See, that's another thing we'll include in tonight's podcast.
Okay, so it's the 17th. But thank you.
Yeah, I thought so.
Appreciate it. It's the 17th. I promise you, we'll call her. Okay.
Yes. You can believe
we're gonna call her. We're gonna call her. All right. Thank you so much, guys. So getting back to our topic, thank you for joining us here tonight, too. The reason why we come on Voices to Men is really important to me. I have really a passion for our young men and the generation that's coming up now. And we're a little older, and we had our children older. And I started to see the cries of single moms and single black moms with their boys and just them raising their boys. And my passion, I had a young father. I had a young father that literally came into the office and sat down across from me because I had to write a letter getting ready to say to him, we're not suitable. We're not equipped for your boys. And I promise you, we worked with them and we worked with them. We prayed with them. I even called people, had them on a prayer list and blah, blah, blah. And so I gave them the date, I gave them the letter, spoke to them, the child, we are not equipped, and I think it's unfair that if we don't give him the help that he needs, that we would, keep swinging him along and him not getting the help that he needs. So the father came in, he sat in the office, and he began to talk, and all of a sudden there was a crack in his voice. And I promise you, when I heard the crack, and he's macho, man, he's like, and all these tears filled his eye, and I'm sure he was open wide eyed so a tear won't fall. And honest again, he said, please, whatever you do, don't put my son out. Please give us an opportunity. He said, I need help. Now, he's a black man raising 2 boys. You understand? Him and the mother is not together. And he is crying out for his son. And he's saying, I don't want my son to be a statistics. I've been there. I did it. And I want something different for them. And when I saw this man cry, we still have those boys at the daycare center to this day. Mm-hmm. And of course, we get in services and things that they need. We're helping. We're a part. I find myself going there every day to sit there next to the kid, hug on them, love on them. Me and my family took them and we spent time. So it was like, okay, I heard this man's heart. I heard his voice. And the problem is we can't respond to what we don't know. So that's why I tell people all the time, it is good. I tell people I'm a talker. I always was a talker. And I think that's probably why a lot of things didn't happen to me. So if you were going to do something, I was going to tell it because I needed to know that I was going to be safe. So in order to know that we can help and we can be a part and we can be a part of walking them through situations, we need to know what it is, right? And so when I heard his heart and when I heard his cry, then I started to realize, hey, this man has some history that he wants somebody to hear or to know. And that's the part that I really was like, okay, once again, how are we raising these boys? How do we become a part of their lives? Or the parents that are single parents or parents that are 2 parents that just don't understand, because some of us may have not had role models of parents that we can duplicate the behavior.
Well, I like what he did because he was wise enough to fight. That's what he did. He may not have called it that, but he was advocating and fighting for his sons. Exactly what the word admonishes us to do. We have to start acknowledging those men that are trying to do better. Yeah, and that's again goes back to what we were saying earlier, that, society is way more inclined to, get to the cause of a struggling woman than they are a struggling man. And we have to realize that, not as an excuse, but there are certain things that are stacked against certain men in our society, African American men in particular. I'll be the first one to tell you that if you are of the opinion that systemic racism is not a reality in this country, then frankly you have a long way to go, because until that is accepted. Do you know, I was sharing with my 10th grade group the other day, can you imagine that right now in the calendar year 2020, December, tomorrow morning, December 8th, you could, after 9 o'clock, after the bell on the New York Stock Exchange rings and trading begins, do you know that right now in December 2020, private prisons are sellable stocks on the New York Stock Exchange? I want you to think about what I just said, that they are selling stocks in private prisons right now in the United States of America. So I don't care what your politics is. You could be left, right, independent. You could be none of the above. I don't want to hear no politician talk to me about prison reform until one of them is man or woman enough to stand up and say that we're going to do something to end the trading of public or private prisons on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay? So let's put this in context now. If they are publicly traded entities, and they are trading tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the sound of the bell when trading begins, what is the likelihood that they are really going to try to reduce the recidivism rate in our prisons? To reduce the recidivism rate in prison would be bad for the business. And businesses that trade publicly are not in business of losing money. So we have a lot of things that we have to address. But here's the thing. We have to be willing to fight in spite of what we know. We cannot use that as an excuse. We cannot use that as reasons to fail our men. But at the same time, we have to be willing enough to address the reality of how uphill the fight is.
And let's be honest, who are the majorities in our prisons?
Well, come on now.
Come on, like really, let's be honest. Who are the majorities in our prison? And so if we begin to, there you go, educate, transform, be a part of recovery, be a part of the solution, giving out in areas where, now, let's be honest, and we actually grew up, I was born and raised in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Me too.
My husband too, on different sides, by the way.
I grew up in the country.
And he grew up in the country. They used to say ours was downtown, his the country. I'm
Country
not sure.
boys.
Country boy. Everything is sidewalks now. But here we go. They used to have things out there we can go to. They had the Police Athletic League, the PAL. They had the YMCA.
They had the CYO, Christian Youth Organization.
Well, I didn't go to that one. That must have been in the country.
No, that was Catholic.
Oh, okay.
CYO is a Catholic organization, but
they had
some
it available.
You still see some of the CYO basketball leagues
Okay.
in Trenton, for example.
Okay. So there was areas where our children could go to and not necessarily the street. Well, that's not made available to them now. Literally down the street from one of the daycare centers that we run, there is a big giant is it MCA or YW? YMCA, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Earlier this year, with COVID, we understand that some things were shut down, some things were open. And I started to realize even prior to COVID, we started looking at the papers and we started looking at different things. Now, when they did the prices, hear my heart, when they did the prices, they were not looking for some of our children who couldn't afford to go there. Because if I'm already on a fixed income, because now those of you know my heart, the daycare centers are my heart. So we do affordable care, not because our daycare center are junky and we don't want to have them. No, I want these children to have the same experience that they would have if they went to one of the big chains. Beautiful building, beautiful time, beautiful education. So one of the things I started to realize, even where we live now, I would go up there and I would fight because I would look in the newspaper and say, oh, there's so many things that's around here for our children to do. But then you go up there and you get the Franklin newsletter, it's attached with a cost. Well, if it's attached with a cost and I have a single parent here who's just making it by just making it, who can give an extra $100? Who can give an extra $200 so that this child, I don't remember paying to go to the YMCA. I don't remember paying to go to the Police Athletic League. I don't remember paying, having a brother and sister, what is the program where the students come from colleges and have a big brother and sister program. We didn't pay for these things. These things were available. And the truth is, in certain parts of our area, there is funding given so it can be.
Yeah. I remember going to the Y on New Street and Livingston Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Y
That's
when we
it.
was kids, right?
I must have missed you.
Yeah, I must have missed you too. I was the little guy with the blonde hair. But thank God we done reconnected. No, but this is good. I'm glad that my wife allowed me to join tonight. Obviously, we're not going to solve all of the problems in one sitting, in one evening of podcasting, but to be mindful of it, to let the folks know that, there is somebody that's willing to listen, that there is somebody that believes that your young person is worth fighting for, that believes that we should mentor and encourage with grace, that we should be both sympathetic and empathetic, that we have to begin to be concerned about the plight of a struggling man in the same way we would be about the plight of a struggling woman. And the fact of the matter is that we need to begin to recognize that perhaps this podcast is it. Maybe this is exactly the form that God created to give them a voice, to give them a platform, to let it be told. I had a young man today, and I'm just really, there's so many aspects of the teaching as a gray beard that's a first-time teacher that I'm really loving. There's parts of it I don't love, frankly, but then there is parts that I love. The interaction with the kids I really do love. And so today we had like maybe 5-6 minutes. I finished ahead of schedule, and he was just so excited to share with me his rap. He wrote it. So I remembered the Lord encouraged me to encourage him. And so me in typical fashion, I was playing the part. I said, hey man, did you drop that track last night? Show me what you got. And he played it for me, and the kids were waiting for my reaction. And so it was on his phone. So I took his phone, I went over to the garbage can, and I was, kids say trash, trash. And they were all like, oh, he's getting roasted by the teacher. But then I came back to him and I said, no. I said, let me tell you something. The reason that I can kid with you like that is because, number one, I like you. Number two, you can trust me. And number three, I actually really liked it, which I did. But then I was able to give him some constructive criticism based upon some things that I thought he can do better, because he's an intellect. And I said, challenge yourself lyrically, not to just come up with the easy, but change the syllable of the word so that it's not just cat, bat, rat, just the typical nursery rhyme type things. But the fact of the matter is, and there's another one. They do know, Malika, who Prince is now, because I was blown clear out of the water. And this has nothing to do with the podcast, honey, so bear with me just a minute. I was blown away the other day that they didn't know who Prince was. Prince, who just died not too long, Prince. And they were blown away.
Purple Rain Prince?
Yes, even my wife.
Well, babe, we are 50.
No, but they didn't know. They didn't know. And so I took it upon myself to teach them from start to finish the lyrics to Raspberry Beret. So they know.
So I don't know Raspberry Beret.
But that's all right. But they know who he is now. They know who he is now. But the fact is that this podcast could be just that. It could be a platform to give the voiceless a voice. It could be a platform to encourage those that are fighting for their sons, fighting for their daughters. And sometimes it feels like it's an uphill fight. But to be able to come out, to connect with the community and say, hey, if nothing else, I'm not in it alone. If nothing else, I have somebody that can touch and agree. So, I don't know, man. I don't know how well I filled in for Hakeem, but
I like it, honey.
I've been blessed by this. Maybe you'll have me back.
No, I just like addressing these issues. And once again, I tell everybody, women, we are talkers. You see me and my niece Malika, we would hit it on but I like hearing people's opinion and their voices, because everybody's situation is different.
Yes.
And once you start to realize that everybody's situation is different, like I told you, voices of men, I had my dad died when he was 52, I was 21. So the part of him I can remember, the part that I wanted, I understood that Slugger covered me. I understood if I called him, he was going to be there for me. Matter of fact, we got this joke. My mother said, if he even knew that I married you, he'd be turning over in the grave. But I said, he'll get to like him. He will. So those are the parts that, we start to realize how my children, and one of the things that really got me the other night, and I got teary-eyed, Malika, listen to this. I got teary-eyed because Jonathan, a picture of my father-in-law and Jonathan came up on your social media. You know how they remind you of certain things, and it came up. And I started to think, I said, man, my children only have a grandparent left. Like when I was little, I had my grandfather and my grandmother, and we used to go to these grandparents' houses. Now, mind you, back in the day, grandparents were like 83 and 70 and 80. Now they're like 40 and 35. So it's a little different. But we used to be able to go to their homes, and if I got sick, I went to my grandma Blunt house, and she would play As the World Turned while I'm laying down. And, so she became a big part of our lives because of the issues and the different changes that we went through with my dad. But one of the other things is I started to realize, is I'm looking at my children, I was like, man, that grandparent, and so, of course, my husband, both my in-laws are gone with the Lord already, and then my dad is gone, and I still, thank God, have my mom, and she's a big part of our lives. But you start to look over our lives, and you start to look over society and the things that was afforded and given to children that some of us miss. And the truth is, my children is don't miss a heartbeat, because God has just filled a lot. And although Jonathan reminds me a lot, I didn't realize until we was talking one day that he remembered his papa, because he was a little young. So there's little triggers that he remembers. He'll put on his social media, he'll find a picture somewhere and he'll find it. But we are really living in a society where children are impressionable, and whatever they encounter is who they're going to become. And think about our lives. A lot of us are living according to what happened to us growing up, until the Lord give us a revelation, say there's a different way. And so that's why it's really important to hear, how are we raising men, or teaching men, or training children to understand that there is a better way, and that they can have another chance in society. And I don't think that we should give up especially on African American young men. And I believe that there is a time for us to, reach out and be a part of the solution, because we do have it. And they just need to know that you care and that you can help them get from here to here. And I believe that God has given us the ability to do that. So I'm glad you guys joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is our third podcast, and my husband joined me tonight, and I love it. So we meet every day about 5 o'clock. We were a little late today because we had a couple of things to do. So we normally do Voices of Men. The reason why I like to bring men on and ask questions, because I want to hear their heart, hear their focus on things, and because I'm a firm believer that men should lead us. Now, that's me. Some of y'all say women live. I'm for that too. Don't get me wrong. I'm limited women. I love my covering. I like what he does, and I love watching my husband with my children and what a dad should be. And I'm not saying there's not other dads out there, but I enjoy watching it. I enjoy watching what I longed for. And seeing it come into fruition with my children, and understanding that I am one of the parents that are raising a African American boy in today's society. And he has his opinions, he has his thoughts, he's very much tied to both cultures, and that's a challenge, but he loves it, and he's very confident, thank God, and who he's born in, what he's born into, and the family that he's born into, and I love that. And one of the things, and we'll end here, and I'll let my husband end here, is we just want to hear the voices. We want to understand that there is a society out there that is governed by destroying our men. It's true. I mean, there's not too many things set up to see them succeed. And if we get on the bandwagon of tearing them down and not giving them something to grow, even if it's a second opportunity, then what are we doing for our young men?
Yeah, I'll close by saying this, that, we often talk about the fact that we don't need anybody to validate us. But there's really something inconsistent with Scripture as it relates to that saying. In fact, when Jesus came up out of the Jordan after having been baptized by John, we know that there was a voice from heaven that said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And so we need to be mindful again how important it is to validate our young men. We've got to validate them by the words that we use. We got to validate them further by the actions we take. We got to validate them by the voice and the platform that we give them. We need to let them know that we care. We got to let them know that we're going to be sympathetic and empathetic towards their plight. We're going to let them know that we're going to grade with grace. We're going to let them know that there always must be room for grace. If there's not room for grace, I just question the Bible that you're reading. There has to be room for redemption. There has to be room for grace. And so the fact of the matter is, we have to be mindful of the fact that if it was important enough for God to open up the heavens and speak in an audible way, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased," then we would be wise to do likewise. To just validate them. Just validate them. Just yesterday, I took just a little brief moment to validate. Jonathan is got his permit, and we went out to eat after church, and he drove back, and he didn't want me to follow him, and I think he was nervous, but I did follow him anyway. But I stayed a close distance. But I told him, little validation. I said, "Son," and I meant it too. I said, "Hey, you drive very well. And you're doing well, and I'm proud of you." I've been validating him. I'm his dad, but I'm his basketball coach, and I've been telling him, and I don't know with COVID how it's all going to go down. But I told him, I said, "Jonathan," and I'm not just saying this as your dad, I'm saying this as your coach. I've been watching a lot of game film from last year. I said, "You're going to get more minutes. Not because you're my son." And the beautiful thing about it is he got limited minutes last year, so nobody can't say I'm playing the dad card or all of that, because it would be earned. But the point is, little validation, little validation, little validation. I am still living off my grandparents' love. See, that's my point. It bears saying. It is worth saying that if heaven validated Christ. Now, let me say this to you, and I'll be done. We have to be real careful, because sometimes the season after validation doesn't look like we anticipated it would. Right? So the story that's rather fascinating about Jesus is, in a very public way, he was endorsed and validated by the God of heaven. "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." But in the very next chapter, we see that he was led by the Spirit, by the hand, into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't think that this would be what the next season would look like after God so publicly validated me. So for the parents among us, for the moms among us, for the grandparents, the nanas, the pop-pops among us, for the coaches and the mentors, listen, just because you validate them today does not mean that they may not find themselves in a hard place tomorrow. But when they find themselves in a hard place, those words of validation will be there to carry them. The words of affirmation will be there to encourage them. The words of encouragement will be there to stir up the gift that is in them. And eventually, I think even those that are really even wayward will come to the place like the prodigal did, where he came to himself and he said, you know what? This is foolishness on my part. I will return to my father's house. And did he not come back into a season that was even greater than he anticipated returning back to? So that's just my thoughts tonight.
So we're gonna close with this, and we're gonna close with his thoughts. And I love my husband for coming on. This was the last minute spare the moment. He's like, "What are we talking about?" Okay, I'm just gonna ask you some questions, honey. But one of the things that Hamilton said, she said, it says we must encourage our children to embrace virtual learning, determination, self-discipline, and dream and pray. One of the things that one of the topics here throughout the week I want to talk about is that virtual learning. I want to encourage you there, and I want to talk about some things there that we can really help our children through this period of time. I have a pet peeve about that. You know, they were rushed into learning virtually at the end of last year and coming into the next year. And if you know, coming out of your year before, you're supposed to be finishing up what you learned in that year and then replay it in the beginning of the year to learn something else. A lot of our children are getting stuck in the middle with virtual learning. And once again, we are living in a society that socially promote our children, and they will continue to socially promote our children until they are dropped out or they leave. So these are some of the things that we want to talk about. Voices of Men is really important. Another reason with virtual learning, especially with young men or men, period, the challenging learning and making sure that we understand that we're catching whether or not they're getting it from the beginning. Make sure you ask your teachers questions. Make sure you send emails. Make sure you be a part of the solution to make sure that this is being done correctly so we won't lose our children when society open back up. But thank you for joining us here on Dare You to Be Different, the iPad. I see you guys coming in, but we are getting to the end of our podcast. I hope you go back and you replay Voices of Men. There is a lot of good information in there for you. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for joining us. We are a new podcast, and we started, this is our, I believe, third episode, which I'm excited about. You will hear me constantly talk about Voices of Men. I want to hear what the men are saying in society. I want to know how we can help you get to the next spot, because I believe in you, and I believe that you are a big part of our next step in stone into our next place. And then one of the things, when somebody inboxed me, asked me about marriage, we'll talk about that later on down the line. So there are so many things, and if you get the opinion, you hear, and we get to share, we understand. But thank you for joining me. I love you guys. Love you, Malika. Love you. Thank you for all those that will replay. Thank you to my husband for joining me. I know this is difficult for him, but I am so excited that he that he joined me. Maybe he'll do this again, and we'll talk about someday how we met. But all right. In the meantime, thank you so much. Thank you for your love and your support. Until next time, we are